Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The second episode of our theory and practice of the musical theatre. So, I hope you come prepared. I hope you've seen Showboat, at least, if not the other films. We'll talk about it in a little moment later today, but for the most part of this class, I'd like to talk with you about the structure of a typical musical play. So it's based on various books. As I told you in the live meeting, there are quite a lot of books to be found on this subject, both in English and also in Polish. The one I'll be using today is Professor Marek Gołębiowski from our institute, his book, which was published in Polish, Musical amerykański na tle kultury popularnej USA. It's still quite good, with one exception. It was published in 1989, so at least from my perspective, just as the most interesting things were happening in the musical theatre, so he doesn't cover them, but otherwise, as far as the structure and this kind of theoretical background goes, it's still recommendable. The other very, very good book, if you can find it, is Julian Wolford, How Musicals Work. It's quite, I would say, introductory, and it has some elements aimed at people who want to write a musical. So if any of you thought about that, this is a good idea. This is really a good way to get the theoretical knowledge you need to write a musical. But if you want only to analyze musicals, the theoretical knowledge will not hurt as well. So that's Kiciuncik. That's my cat assistant. She wants to go out of the door. I'll let her out in a moment. Okay, you can go. Just go. So, of course, the element without which no musical can happen is music. And one of the questions that Professor Gołębiowski asks in his book is music an authentic or artificial need? How important is music in our lives? Is it like bread or is it like cakes? So is it something that we all need? Well, some people do not need bread, but food, let's say, some sort of food or some sort of extra special, pleasurable treat. I don't know, I think it depends on the person. Generally, music has existed for as long as human society, so even very ancient and remote cultures had music, have music, so it's probably a very deep-seated human need. Yes, come back, Kiciuncik. So, but the musical theatre combines music and theatre and stage acting. So, can we say which part is more important? And does it work in the musical the same way as it does in other genres that combine music and theatre, like the opera, for example? So is it just the difference in the style of music, that one uses classical music and classical trained voices and the other uses more popular styles? Is it just a matter of style? There are many similarities, some musicals have spoken dialogue. Some operas also have spoken dialogue, but most operas only have sung dialogues and songs and scenes. With musicals, you have musicals that are sung through. That's a term, a technical term. Sung through, which means they are not. They do not have spoken dialogue. I would say probably the role of music in the opera is more important because you can have the audio versions of the opera without all the visual aspects, but you cannot have operas without music. But the same applies to musicals. You can have audio recordings, you can have even the concert versions. There are some very good concert versions of Les Miserables, for example, or Sweeney Todd, that do not have at least the full performance with the stage sets and everything, but they still are very good. So they are quite similar in this way, but going back to the types of musicals, there are different types of musicals. Like with any well-developed theatrical genre, you have different types. Most of the musicals today fall into the category of the book musical. The book musical may be based on a literary source. Very often they are, but it doesn't really, the name does not imply that. It means it has a coherent story. The story could be taken from a book, but it could be taken from anything else. Could be film, could be a biography of a real person, like in case of Evita, let's say. Cartoons, anything, just, well, any kind of storytelling. The idea is that there is a narrative, there is a plot, there are characters, there is some development, and everything in the musical, including the music and the songs and the dances and the mise en scène, which is the visual aspects and the stage direction, contribute to the fact that a story is told. If everything contributes well and in a coherent manner, this is called an integrated musical. We'll talk about integrated musicals starting probably from next week, when we start talking about the history of the genre and how the genre was revolutionized by Oklahoma. And this is something that I would like you to watch for next week, the musical Oklahoma by Rodgers and Hammerstein. But the book musical just tells a story. This is something which is important. The other type of musical, which used to be more popular in the past when the shows were more in the variety style, but then it was completely overshadowed by the book musical, is the concept musical. The concept musical sometimes has characters, usually, well, it's quite difficult not to have characters, but they do not tell a coherent story. They have like a succession of numbers that are sometimes interchangeable, so it doesn't really matter in which order the songs are sung. Sometimes there is like a kind of theme that links these songs together, or there is some kind of development, but very, very rudimentary. If you want examples, there are quite a few famous examples. A very famous example is Hair, that we are going to watch at some stage. The musical about the hippies in New York during the time of the Vietnam War. So what we have is a colorful group of young people. Each of them has their own song, their own story, and they are vaguely related to each other because they are a friendly group, and they all try to avoid conscription to Vietnam. An interesting thing is that there are quite significant differences between the stage version and the film version, the film adaptation. That is now the most popular version of Her. I've seen both the stage productions and the film, and the major difference is that the creators of the film decided they could not really put the concept musical on film because it would not be attractive to the viewers. So they increased the element of the storyline, like this kind of thread on which the songs, the numbers sit. So if you watch the screen version of Hair, it tells more of the story than the stage version. Another very famous example of a concept musical is Cats. So again, a story about different cat characters who tell their own tale. We're also going to watch that. If you're brave enough, you can watch the new version from last year. Or the old recording of a stage production. Another example, Company by Stephen Sondheim, about a group of friends who advise their friend who turns 35, it's his birthday party, on whether or not he should get married. So there is a common theme, but let's say the order in which the different friends and couples talk to the birthday boy is not that important. So the book musical and the concept musical. There is sometimes a subgenre called the chamber musical, which is like a very small scale musical for just a few actors. For example, Andrew Lloyd Webber's Song and Dance is this kind of musical, which is I would say the musical theater equivalent of a monodram. So you have one actor or one actress, and of course there you have the musicians because somebody has to play the music. But it's not a big musical in the sense of expensive productions. Another thing is a jukebox musical. Jukebox, like those machines, very popular, especially in America in the 50s and the 60s. You would put a coin inside and they would play a popular song from a record. So these musicals, the jukebox musicals, use the songs that people already know. Usually songs from a famous group or famous performer or famous composer. It is either a life story about some performers trying to achieve success, like Jersey Boys, for example. This is a good example of a jukebox musical that uses the songs from the repertoire of a pop group, the Four Seasons. But also we have musicals that use the material that people already know, but put it in a different context. A very good example is Mamma Mia. So the songs are taken from the pop group ABBA, but they were never written for a musical. They were just pop songs, and they were to be enjoyed individually or perhaps as a record, but without a theme, without a story. But the creators of Mamma Mia believed it was a good idea to link those songs, to arrange them in such a way that they tell a story. They tell a story, if you've seen the musical, about a young woman who tries to find out who her father was on her wedding day. So because she wants to have a wedding, to invite her father, and there are 3 candidates because her mother had a rather adventurous life. So they used the songs of ABBA that were not written for this purpose to tell this story. Another example, Across the Universe, a film musical using the music of the Beatles. Or We Will Rock You, a musical using the songs of Queen. They were not written for a musical, but they were made into a musical later on, very often with the collaboration or at least permission of the original creators. Why is this such a popular subgenre? Because people like the songs they already know. There's this old Polish comedy, Race, the boat trip or whatever, and they talk about the musical taste, and one of the characters says he only likes the songs that he heard before. How could he like a song he never heard? So this is the appeal of the jukebox musical. People like the songs they've heard before. Exactly, there is a fan base. It could be a bit tricky because if you do not satisfy the expectations of the fans of the original songs of the group or the performer or someone, they might be disappointed, but they will come at least once. They will come because they like this music and they want to see what's been made of it. Quite a few interesting cases. Well, we could go on. Moulin Rouge, The Rock of Ages. So there are quite a lot of such musicals. There is also the backstage musical. The backstage musical is the musical that, at least partially, takes place in a musical. So it is about performers, different kinds of performers. It could be a theatrical troupe staging a musical. It could be film crew. It could be the opera crew, like in The Phantom of the Opera. We have the performers working in the opera house. So we have some... we have the managers, we have the singers, we have the ballet dancers. So the people who are entertainers, although not really in the same style as the musical is using. But one of the earlier musicals that we are going to watch later on, Kiss Me Kate, uses like a double plot. One is the staging, the musicalized staging of Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew, and the other one is the backstage life of the actors who play in this show. So that's what we have. We might also have a concept. This is something that goes back to the 1930s, 1940s, when there was this expectation that musicals should be entertaining and uplifting and generally comedies. If they were not exactly so, you might get a concept of the adult musical, something with more serious themes, the themes usually involving the problems faced by adult people, so not young people in love finding their place in the world, but One of the early examples, a very interesting musical from 1940, Pal Joey, is about an older woman. She's very rich, but she's lonely and she's afraid of the passing time, and she gets seduced by an unscrupulous young man who wants to use her money. Company, I already mentioned, by Stephen Sondheim, is also sometimes called the adult musical because it deals with the problems of adult life. It's quite vague. It's never kind of set in stone that this musical is only this kind. Like, you can see, Company can be called a concept musical and at the same time an adult musical. So that's really what you have. Something that happens quite a lot is the adaptations of successful musicals from the stage to film. This was probably initiated the latest phase, the latest craze for adapting musicals, popular, successful, big musicals for the screen was probably initiated by Chicago, and then it just went from there. Evita, The Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables, probably ending the good years of such musicals with the big flop of Cats last year. And this is interesting, really, to see how musicals get changed in adaptation, how the medium of the stage production changes with the adaptation to the big screen. We'll talk about that when we move on to discussing individual musicals. There were also quite a lot of, especially in recent years, quite a lot of cases of films that were not originally musicals. Sometimes they didn't even have any music, or they had some music in them being adapted to the stage. So, like live performances of famous or successful films. A good example here is Legally Blonde, for example. It was not a musical, it was a comedy, alright, but there was no singing, no dancing. It was made into a very successful and very charming musical. Some films like Billy Elliot, about a young boy who wants to be a ballet dancer, started as a film and then they were adapted to live stage. A very famous example was one of the early successful films of the musical films of Disney Company, Beauty and the Beast, a very successful animated movie. They actually got the Oscar for the best film the year they took part in the contest. And this was the game changer for Disney because they decided, okay, everybody has probably seen the film, let's make a live show out of this. They wrote a few more songs, they hired actors, they used very spectacular stagecraft, and they created a live show that was so successful. It actually opened again a kind of subcategory of Disney musicals, which were largely adapting for the stage the successful animated films. Lion King, we're going to talk about Lion King at some stage. This is so much different. If you've seen the film, the animated film, and then the stage version, the music, well, you probably knew it, but not the visuals. The visual side was completely different. So this is what happened. Singing in the Rain. Everybody has heard about Singing in the Rain, and they think it was a musical that was brought to the stage, but no, it was the other way around. It was the film first, not the stage version. It was so successful that they decided to make it into a live production. for the people. The producers, the same. The film was first. Then there are some rare and not usually successful attempts of sequels. Two examples. We are going to look at one of them later on. Love Never Dies, the sequel to The Phantom of the Opera, which is, I think, a well-deserved flop despite beautiful music and very talented actors and very good staging. Not going to go into details now. Or Grease 2. There is this famous musical Grease, especially the film version was very famous with John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John, about a good girl meeting a bad boy and falling in love. So they made Grease 2 with, who was that? Michelle Pfeiffer as the bad girl meeting a good boy. It's hilarious. It's a flop, but it's hilarious. So as you can see, there are different kinds of musicals and different subgenres of musicals that use a lot of different techniques and stagecraft. And we continue in a moment.